Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will be your driver on this journey. Today on the road, I wanted to take a look at some pretty famous games that have happened throughout chess history, some more famous than others, but the common thread here is that these are all games where the world champion at the time ended up losing. So I thought it'd be fun to see how some of the chess's greatest players in all of history have slipped up throughout time. So the first game I wanted to look at is a game of the current world champions, that is Magnus Carlsen, and this is a game that he had against Wesley So way back in 2018 at Norway Chess. And this is a game that's pretty dear to my heart because Wesley So chose an opening that I play myself. It's an opening that doesn't have the best reputation, but if it's enough to beat Magnus Carlsen, it's probably enough to beat just about anybody. So why don't we just take a look, see what happened. The opening I'm talking about, of course, happens after d4, d5, c4, c6, and then my favorite line to play against the Slav, of course, c takes d5. C takes d5, c takes d5. This is, of course, the exchange Slav. And now the exchange Slav has a pretty bad reputation for being a boring opening, prone to draws, that is pretty easy to hold with black. You know, white doesn't have much to play for. But we'll see that Wesley So actually managed to come up with some chances here and pretty much just outplayed the world champion Magnus Carlsen. The game continued with bishop f4. I think this is the best line for white in the exchange Slav. Knight f6, and then knight c3 was Wesley So's choice. I kind of prefer this move e3, getting this bishop out to d3 as quickly as possible, but by no means is it a mistake. Knight c6 now is controlling the e5 square, so e3 is called for. If you play a different move, if you play some like weird move like a3, you might even run into some ideas of playing the crazy looking e5 in some positions. I don't know if it works here, but for example, that's something to look out for. If you play, for example, if knight c6 here, and you play a move like knight c3, well, now e5 is definitely going to be on the cards. So things to look out for if you play the exchange Slav yourself. Look out for these e5 breaks. e3 is usually enough to prevent it. Wesley So chose knight f3 instead, also controlling the e5 square. Now a6 is Magnus Carlsen's choice, keeps an eye on the b5 square, and helps alleviate some pressure in case of a move like queen b3. Just makes it a little bit less threatening with this pawn already on a6. Now rook c1 is played, and with a6 on the board, bishop f5 does end up being played. So we have e3 now, and rook c8 from the world champion. Pretty natural development. This is all pretty standard stuff. Now bishop e2 from Wesley So, e6, and white castles. Now is really where Magnus deviates from the generally accepted best line for black. Generally, the move bishop d6 is what players with the black pieces are playing to secure a more or less even position. The game might continue with bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and a move like knight a4. And white's going to look to plant this knight on c5, as we'll see he later does in this game, and just play for some extra space on the queen side and try to put some pressure on these queenside pawns. The difference in the game is that Magnus chose not to take these bishops off the board with bishop d6. Instead, Magnus plays the move knight d7 here, opting to leave these dark-squared bishops on the board. And with this extra piece, Wesley just managed to create a few more chances for the white pieces than if these bishops were exchanged. Wesley continued very, very naturally, though. He plays knight a4, aiming for knight c5, as I previously mentioned. Now bishop d6, of course, is no longer playable as the knight interferes with the queen, so bishop e7 instead is the natural development. And here, Wesley really takes his time, plays a nice move, h3, just giving this bishop some more flight squares if it needs it, and also just, securing the g4 square, not allowing any bishop g4 stuff. It's just a nice improving move, makes left for the king even. h3, pretty good move here. No need to rush things with white. Magnus went ahead and castled, and now I'd like you guys at home to try and find Wesley So's next move. It's pretty intuitive, and it's more or less the way that white should be playing in these types of structures. More or less the way white should be playing. And there's also a move I want you guys to go ahead and try to avoid. It's a move I think you guys should avoid playing. Let's see what you can come up with. Hello to Chess is Fun. Also, big hello to Thomas Kirkow Hill, who wanted a shout out at the beginning of the show. Now that we're deep in our position and I'm asking you guys to think, I'll start saying hello to everybody. Hello to Ben in the chat. Hello to Ben. And Storm GD. All the regulars seem to be here. I'm a Docs Gamer. All the regular people. So what do you guys think? What should White be playing here? And what shouldn't White be playing here? Okay, Vinny says bishop d6. I'm assuming he means bishop d3. Bishop d6 would be a little bit strange. I don't really like the move bishop d3. White's looking to keep this bishop on the board because it makes some nice pressure on the queen side. Docs Gamer says knight c5 or queen b3. A lot of people are saying knight c5. A lot of people are saying queen b3. And one more vote for bishop d3. So none of you are trying to play it like Wesley So far. I really don't like this move bishop d3. Black's simply going to capture, and you've really lost a lot of the pressure that you had on these queenside pawns. So this is not going to be a favorable trade for White, so no reason to really do it. The move knight c5 I think might be fine, but this is a move that I actually thought you guys should maybe avoid playing for another turn or two. And the reason is, when you play knight c5, you of course give your opponent the option to capture. You will have to capture back with the pawn, and now you've given up a lot of control over these dark squares in the center. So a move like bishop f6 could come on the board, and with this knight placed on c6, Black is really controlling these central squares, and it's going to be tough for White to gain these back. You have to play a move like knight d4 right away, and then even bishop takes d4 is more or less securing a totally even position for Black. Moves like queen f6 still come, and like I said, the fight for the dark squares is not going to be over quite so easily. So I think knight c5 might be a little bit premature because of this idea where Black can take and play a move like bishop f6 just to gain control of a lot of these dark squares. Another idea you do have to look out for, it's probably not the greatest here, but moves like e5 are always going to be on the cards for Black. So for example, if you don't play a move like knight d4, play a move like queen b3, well, now e5 is going to come on the board, and this is something you have to be very, very careful of with the white pieces. So instead of all of these moves, Bobby Madden has the right idea. You want to play the move a3, and a3 does a few things. First and foremost, it's a pretty good waiting move. It waits for Black to commit to something so that White has more information before committing to a move like knight c5. Secondly, it is doing something productive. By controlling the b4 square, you're preparing to play the move b4 yourself and play knight c5 under slightly more favorable circumstances. So the move played in the game is knight a5, and this is more or less exactly what Wesley was hoping for. With knight a5, note that now Black has diverted a piece away from the central e5 square. And with this change, now Wesley is more than happy to play knight c5 because these threats of e5 are going to be coming a lot more slowly with this knight sidelined on a5. Another option for the world champion would have been to play b5 here. And now after knight c5, you can kind of achieve the same stuff we were looking at earlier with bishop f6, but after committing to b5, it is just going to be a little bit worse than that first line we looked at, because this pawn on c5 is of course now a passed pawn. So White perhaps maintaining a slight edge in this position in particular. So knight a5 was the world champion's choice, not yet committing to b5, and knight c5 the natural follow-up for Wesley So. Once again, Magnus diverts a piece from the center, so Wesley's more than happy to allow this trade now. Note that tactically this does work if you do take here and take back, and either rook takes, bishop takes, or bishop takes immediately, you run into b4, gaining a piece. So no worries about this pawn hanging on c5. Instead, Magnus Carlsen chose to play the move knight c4. And this gets into some crazy stuff. After knight c4, Wesley So's big idea was to play the move b4. And this is how Wesley is securing this knight on c5. However, you all at home have probably spotted the obvious flaw with b4. That flaw being, you've left a pawn behind. So what is Wesley So's idea here? Well, his idea is that he's really good at calculating, and he saw that black has some serious problems if he does end up taking on a3. So that's actually what was played in the game. Perhaps a different option for Magnus would be to play the move b5 here, just securing the knight on c4, but it does give up this a6 pawn, and it's not so easy to actually regain this pawn. Black is definitely going to run into some difficulties. For example, knight c7 and knight takes b5 might be one way of white continuing here. So instead of that, though, Magnus does just capture this pawn on a3, although I should mention he takes this knight off the board first, d takes c5. Then once again, b5 is an option here for black, but it's that similar type of thing where then this pawn is just going to be a passed pawn, and white does have a nagging advantage. So knight takes a3 comes on the board instead. Now, Wesley's follow-up is the nice move, knight to d4. The point being, it takes away the knight's really only good retreating square. In the meantime, it's also attacking this bishop on f5. This would be a very unfavorable trade for black, fracturing the pawns, weakening d5, getting rid of the bishop. So bishop e4 is played to secure the bishop. Wesley now includes the move f3 just to drive this bishop back and keep control over this e4 square. And now after queen b3, Wesley is regaining his pawn comfortably due to this knight's unfortunate placement. So knight c4, bishop takes c4, d takes c4, and queen takes c4. And all of a sudden, from the notoriously drawish exchange Slav, Wesley So has achieved something. What has he achieved? Well, he's achieved a very significant advantage in space on this queen side. Magnus, however, has gotten something in return. Of course, in return, Magnus has achieved the bishop's pair. Bishop's pair is bishop's pair, as some commentators would say. But in this case, I really think this advantage in space works in white's favor compared to these bishops. My reasoning being, this bishop on g6 simply isn't very impressive. It looks at this one diagonal, but none of these squares are particularly important for white to use. And in the meantime, white's just going to bring a rook to d1, and with this lack in space, it's not so easy to find squares to put these pieces on for black. It's really not easy at all. In fact, the move that Magnus played here kind of highlights how bad black's position actually is. Queen e8 is his move of choice, and this is a very, very ugly move. Magnus was trying to find some kind of activity, looking for moves like queen a4, but for the moment, it's quite clear that black's pieces are stepping on each other's toes. This queen in the way of the rook, this bishop in the way of the queen, and this bishop not really coordinating with the rest of the pieces at all. And so it's the type of position where I definitely would prefer white. Okay, so in the game, Wesley played the very simple bishop g3. He's just kind of sitting on the position, slowly improving his pieces. Bishop g3, of course, steps out of any potential e5 tactics when these pieces would have been forked. Sorry, excuse me, these two pieces here. In the game, Magnus chose to play the move e5 anyways, and I think this was a pretty committal decision. Now after e5, Magnus has really put this pawn on a square where it's more or less indefensible. Of course, there are some tactics to be aware of. If bishop takes e5 here, undoubtedly Carlsen was planning bishop takes c5 when you would regain the pawn and the piece if captures and captures. And this is probably what Magnus was hoping for. But in the game, Wesley does a very good maneuver, which is simply knight b3. And this is the way to play when you have more space like this. It's a pretty permanent advantage in space that Wesley So has, and so he's not rushing things. He's not going directly headfirst into tactics like bishop takes e5, allowing his opponent to simplify. He's keeping all of the pieces on the board and letting the pressure slowly build. So the patience is really what is killing Magnus here. If Wesley were a slightly more impatient player, not playing moves like bishop g3, instead just going crazy with stuff like c6 right away, then Magnus would have a lot more chances to get back into the game. Instead, Wesley just sits on the position, improves his pieces, steps out of any threats Magnus intends to make. And now, after knight b3, this is becoming a very real threat to the e5 pawn, and Magnus plays the move bishop d8. And perhaps this is the move that really cements Wesley So's advantage. Now, after bishop d8, Wesley continues to improve his pieces and plays the move queen d5. All of a sudden, this move attacks a pawn on b7. This move also attacks a pawn on e5, and there's no way to defend both of these pawns. So this is a real masterclass from Wesley So, really. Notice he takes on c5, getting this space advantage. Tactically, it works out for him because after knight a3, he takes away the knight's retreating square. And then with this space advantage, he takes his time, just improves his pieces, and lets Magnus more or less dig his own grave with this e5 pawn. So once again, bishop d8, queen d5, no way to solve both threats, so queen b5 from the world champion, trying to make counter threats on this queen side. Now, the time is right for Wesley to strike. So bishop takes e5, comes on the board, and who can spot the refutation to queen takes b4? I'll leave this one for a tactics puzzle for you guys at home. It's a pretty fun line that refutes this one here. What is stopping Magnus Carlsen from regaining his pawn on b4? What can be done? Yes, hello to Akarsh. Once again, the theme for tonight's lecture is games where the world champions have been defeated. We're looking at the world champions' worst moments throughout history. Of course, it takes a lot to beat a world champion, and that's why these games are so interesting. Who sees the refutation? Okay, someone is saying Tc4. I think T means rook, but unfortunately that does hang this knight on b3. Everybody else is saying bishop c3. And the Dodenstein finds the move bishop d6. So it is actually this move bishop d6 that is the answer. Yeah, Mohammed finds it as well. Bishop c3 isn't quite enough here. It just gains a tempo, but this queen is very comfortable retreating back to b5. Bishop d6, though, is the killer blow. And it might not look like a fork, but in fact it is. You attack this rook on f8. If this rook moves out of the way, now the move c6, as you guys are saying in the chat, comes onto the board. And with this tempo on the queen, black is just totally busted here. The queen can move out of the way. C takes b7. You get a check, but nothing more. You can take here. I'll just take back. And I am queening by force. So it looks pretty good. Just a quick side note, if b takes c6, you can simply capture the queen. And unfortunately for black, this pawn is in fact pinned. So nice tactics from Wesley So here to convert his positional advantage into a material one by winning a pawn. Excuse me. All right. So bishop e7 from Magnus Carlsen aims to prevent these types of bishop d6 tactics. Now, once again, very uncompromising play from Wesley So. He simply plays queen d2, guarding this pawn on b4. And this is why this position is so annoying for black. It seems like whatever black tries, white is perfectly patient, totally calm, just sits on the position and allows his opponent to make his own mistakes. It's a very Magnus Carlsen way of playing, actually. Rook fd8 now comes on the board, and bishop d6 from Wesley So. Just putting a stopper on all of the black pieces. Bishop takes d6 is not really what black is aiming for here, as this pawn on d6 is going to definitely be more of a strength than a weakness. It's difficult for black to really get at this pawn, and it's quite close, in fact, to becoming a queen. For example, queen b6 would hit it, but now d7, and rook c8 ideas are already going to come on the board. Knight c5 is a very convenient way to defend this pawn, and black is busted. So, okay, instead of takes, Magnus goes for bishop f6, maintaining the bishop pair, getting on a better diagonal. But now, the move a4 is a bit of a rude awakening for this bishop on g6. This bishop, which once at least felt like it was controlling some squares, is just totally locked out of the game now, with nothing much to do. So h6 by Magnus, creating some luft, and now knight d4. And you can really tell that Wesley is in total control of this position. Up a pawn, none of the black pieces are playing in this game, and Wesley is just slowly advancing. Bishop takes d4 comes on the board. Queen takes d4, rook e8. Now rook e1 from Wesley, getting the pieces in the game. And finally now g4. And this is Wesley's way of putting the finishing touches on this game. Just playing it totally against this bishop and expanding on the king's side. Really impressive stuff. Jan wonders why bishop d8 was played, because the tactic bishop takes c5 still existed. Well, the reasoning is, what else do you play? I'll jump back to that position at the end, if I remember, hopefully. But let's keep going for the moment. f6 gives this bishop some squares. But now, with all of the black pieces out of the game, Wesley is perfectly fine, pushing even more pawns in front of his king. f4, queen c6, and now f5. Bishop f7, and this game is pretty much dead. Who can find the next moves for Wesley So? They are pretty consistent with his play so far, but I'll let you go ahead at home. Try and find the real finishing touches that Wesley put on this game. I'm looking for a pretty short-term plan. Not just one move, not just two moves, but kind of a plan. It doesn't take Wesley long to enact it, but it is more of a plan than a specific series of moves here. So see what you guys can come up with. So yes, Alkash Denis Boros, as of May 1st, is going to be our new Grandmaster in Residence. However, Dorsa is actually just a chess club employee as well. So stay tuned, she'll be teaching a class or two throughout the week, and maybe even doing some streams. Okay, Mohammed says e5, Venitha says h4, Marcin says e5, Venitha switches his guess to e5, King f2, e5, e6. So you guys haven't quite found Wesley's idea here. Everybody thinks it's the move e5. e5 is really letting black off the hook a little bit. This throws away a significant portion of your advantage, I think. F takes e5 comes on the board, and if you take, well, now black will take. For example, queen takes, rook e8, queen g3, and all of a sudden the black pieces have gotten themselves into the game. You have to be very careful here, very careful. So e4 kind of throws away the bind that Wesley has on this position. Okay, Venitha has the right idea now, as does Jan and Mehdi, as well as Chess is Fun. h4 and g5 is how Wesley So wanted to continue the game. And this is a perfect example of how to convert a position where you have a spatial advantage. In this case, of course, Wesley's also up a pawn, which definitely does his position some good. But when you have an advantage in space, the thing that tends to happen is you cut the board in half with this central space. For example, this bishop prevents these pieces from easily accessing the king's side of the board. So because the black pieces are sort of split apart like this, you want to aim to create threats on both sides of the board. So with the pieces locked on the queen side for black, Wesley is now looking to make threats around the black king using this extra space, and because he has the extra space, it's a lot easier to get the white pieces into this side of the board than it is for black. So when you have a spatial advantage like this, this is really a great way to make use of it. You try and create threats on both sides of the board, or at least the side that is difficult for your opponent to reach. So here, Wesley So's move, h4. Rook a8 was Magnus's choice, desperately trying to find counterplay over here, and it turns out the best move for Wesley was simply just to play g5. Instead, though, he played a preparatory move, rook c2. Magnus now continues with a5, and now Wesley does continue with g5, and this is also just going to be more or less totally winning. Now, g5 does in fact make a threat of g6. Of course, it'd be suicidal to take and open the h-file. This is just going to be devastating. Instead, bishop h5 from Magnus tries to hold on, and now the simple move g6 check was Wesley So's choice. Turns out g takes f6 was probably good enough, just winning all these king side pawns. But g6 was what Wesley chose to play, and now king h8. And Wesley chose this move b5. a nice little sacrifice here to keep this rook out of the game and in fact activate Wesley's own pieces. So you see, he made threats on the king side. Now this king is going to be permanently weak on the h8 square, and now Wesley So is going for threats on the queen side. This idea of threats on both sides of the board. Now perhaps for Magnus, queen d7 would have held on with a bit more tenacity. Instead though, queen c6 was his choice. Now rook b6 comes with tempo, and after queen c8, the move queen d5 is deadly. This is just deadly for Magnus. a4 was tried, but after rook takes b7, now there's a threat of rook takes g7, so rook g8 comes on the board, but after c6, Magnus Carlsen had seen enough and resigned this position. So this is a real favorite game of mine of Wesley So's, showing that the Exchange Slav can have some winning chances. Now, there was a question earlier on about a bishop d8 move that Magnus chose to play, so why don't we jump back to that position. So here after knight b3, I was talking about how there's pressure on this e5 pawn, lasting pressure, and there's this tactic where if white captures, then bishop takes c5, wins back the piece and the pawn. So why after knight b3 did Magnus play bishop d8? Well, it's simply a matter of what else do you play. You can play a move like h6, and it's true that bishop takes e5 is still not going to be the best move for white due to this, but white is really in no hurry. Simply a move like e4, you start bringing rooks to the center, and this is going to be a permanent problem for you here. So it was more of a question of, you know, what else do you play with black? That's why I think bishop d8 was in fact played. Not on Twitch? Yeah, Joe, so the last class of the evening, Analyze Your Games, will take place on Twitch, but the Road to 2000 is traditionally a YouTube class. Okay, so with that in mind, this is a really model game from Wesley So, as I said, showing how to play with more space, and showing that the Exchange Slav does in fact have some tricky bits to it that you need to avoid. And I think this is one of the last games Magnus Carlsen lost in standard chess. That guy just doesn't lose anymore. I guess he figured it out. He just doesn't lose anymore. So, good game from Wesley So to take out the current world champion. Why don't we move on to a slightly more famous game where a former world champion was defeated. This is a game between Garry Kasparov and the controversial computer Deep Blue. And this is a game that Deep Blue ended up winning, and it's a pretty fun one, so I thought we'd take a look at it. So e4, c5 was played, c3, going for the Alapin, the c3 Sicilians. And these are known for being a little bit less ambitious for white, less tactical, less challenging, just going for simple d4 stuff. Now, who in the chat knows why the c3 Sicilians are less challenging? What is the move for black that really highlights why c3 is not the most testing move? Who knows? I'll give you just a second to think about it. Just a second. Okay, hopefully everybody at home knows it is this move, d5. By playing c3, you take away your option to play knight c3, taking away your option to challenge the d5 square. So after d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5. The queen is simply going to be an active piece for black, and he should have no trouble completing his development and surviving the opening. When has this been played? This is the 1996 match between Garry Kasparov and Deep Blue, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah, 1996. Okay, now d4 comes on the board for white, and black simply continues development with the move knight f6. Now knight f3, bishop g4, aims to pin the knight. Bishop e2 simply unpins, and now e6. Like I said, this opening, not the most challenging from white actually. Black just finishes development quite naturally. So e6, h3 was his choice. This bishop drops back to h5, and now castles. Knight c6 from Garry, challenging the center a bit more. Bishop e3, controlling the center a bit more. Now we have c takes d4 and c takes d4, accepting an isolated queen-pawn position. Now, if you guys are familiar with IQP type of positions, kind of the nature of them is that in the long run, white is going to have some spatial advantage in the center, giving him an advantage in activity. Meanwhile, black is going to have a more or less permanent weakness on the d4 square. This pawn, with no other pawns to back it up, can become a bit weak. So we'll see how the computer and Garry both chose to approach this position. So bishop b4 was Garry's choice in the game. Now a3 by deep blue, bishop back to a5, and this is actually not the most common way of playing with black these days. Bishop e7 is more generally black's most common option, and the point is you just don't give white this a3 move with tempo. After knight c3, you'll bring this queen back to d6, and it looks a little bit awkward for the black pieces, but you do avoid giving a3 with tempo. That being said though, bishop b4, Garry's choice in the game, a3, bishop a5, and now knight c3 by deep blue. Hits this queen in the center, so the queen retreats back to d6. Knight b5 is deep blue's choice, and after queen d5, who's to say if deep blue was intending to repeat? Maybe deep blue had some other ideas. Playing a move like b4, for example, could be considered. Moves like g4 as well, also on the cards. But Garry didn't give it the chance to repeat, instead choosing queen e7, with the idea that you are just keeping things solid and controlling e5 a bit more, hinting at maybe an e5 break later in the game. Also clearing off this d file for a rook to come. But okay, in the game, knight e5 was deep blue's choice, allowing bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, and black simply castles. Now rook ac1 comes on the board, rook ac8, the players bring the rooks into the game, and bishop g5 is deep blue's choice. So deep blue really hasn't done too much to really pressure Garry's position in this game. It's just hoping to use this d pawn as a hook for a knight on e5, and with this knight on e5, just a little bit more comfortable with the white pieces than with the black pieces. So there is some tactical issues here for white. For example, if a6, you do, I think, have to include this move knight takes c6 to relieve pressure on d4, and then we could see kind of the pieces explode off the board. For example, queen takes f6 would allow a knight a7 move. And so it's just a little bit tough for Garry to immediately clarify things, which is probably what the black player desires in these positions. You want more clarity to get to the type of endgame where you know you're just going to be totally fine with this weakness on d4. Fortunately, it's not so easy to get there after the move a6. In the game, Garry goes for this move bishop b6 instead, putting more pressure on d4. The only issue with this is that now, after the move bishop takes f6, it's not so easy to play queen takes f6. You're going to get hit with knight d7 when you're losing, in fact, an entire exchange. So not ideal. So after bishop takes f6, the move g takes f6 has to come on the board, as it does. And now the move knight c4 is deep blue's choice. So what's preventing knight takes d4? I hear you asking at home. Well, we can simply take this piece, and after takes back, we have queen g4 check. Already highlighting the weakness in black's position. So instead, rook f to d8 is Garry Kasparov's choice, and already deep blue has a little bit of an advantage. Garry just played slightly inaccurately with the pieces here, allowing this weakness to be forged on the king's side, if I can use such a word. And with this weakness around the king, white should be able to kind of maneuver the pieces to be just ever so slightly better. In fact, knight takes b6 was played in the game, a takes b6, and then my present-day computer says that after queen g4, king h8, and rook d1, a move like f5 could come, and queen f4, and white just has a little bit of pressure here. Threats of d5 later to come, threats of g4 even could be on the cards to break down this kingside structure, and moves like rook c3 and over to somewhere on the king's side can also be on white's mind. Instead in the game, deep blue actually played slightly inaccurately here, not choosing to include this move queen g4 check, and it turned out that this really threw away much of his advantage. So rook fd1 comes instead. Now the move f5 is very accurate by Kasparov, guarding this g4 square, not giving white the chance to get this queen on the slightly more active f4 square. So white settles for e3 instead of f4. And that's just the slight difference in this game that really allowed Garry to equalize here. Now queen f6 comes on the board. It's very sensible for Garry to try and pressure this d4 pawn. And then Deep Blue kind of relents and goes for d5. After d5, things get a lot more simple for both sides. E takes d5, b3. And what do we have now? Well, Garry Kasparov is up a pawn, but of course he is playing with quite a large number of weaknesses. So it's actually totally impossible for black to hold together everything here. So Garry simply plays the move king h8, allowing white to regain the pawn on b6 and go for some active play. So black plays the move rook g8. This is a very sensible move, taking advantage of the open g file. And then white plays the move queen c5. Now, if you're Garry Kasparov, what move do you think you should play here? See if you can play it better than Garry, because Garry's next move more or less lost the game for him. So I'm interested if the chat can figure out the way to equalize here, or to secure an equal position for Garry. What can be done? What can be done as I watch the chat? I know I've gone through the game pretty quickly up to this point, but the real highlight of this game is this tactical finish. So that's why we've gone straight to the goods. So it looks like you guys have some pretty good ideas here. Of course, black is always going to have the worst structure in this position. What does black have in exchange for it? Well, he's got pressure on the king side. So it's very logical that black's counterplay to get to achieve equality is to go for this pressure on the king side rather than spend all of his time defending things on the queen side in the center. You know, this type of active counterplay is really what black should be aiming for here. And the fact is, Garry just played a little bit too slowly. Now this move knight e5 isn't my favorite, because I think white could in fact just favorably take this pawn on d5, guarding against whatever threats you just made. But some other choices that you guys were saying are a little bit better. Queen b2 also isn't really my favorite move in history. It's just kind of vacating the king side a little bit too much. The moves I do like that I'm seeing in the chat are these moves f4 and this move queen g5. These are the two moves that I really think secure equality for Garry. And the reason they do is really the same for both moves. Let's start with queen g5. Well, now you've got a very serious problem on your g2 square. The only way to solve this is to play the move g3. If you dare play queen takes d5, well, you've hung a rook on c1. So g3, only way to deal with this, and then there's the natural follow-up f4. And this is going to be good enough for Garry to end up securing at least a draw in this game. The only way I think is sensible to play it for white is with g4. You can throw in moves like knight d6 if you like, forcing the queen to come back and follow it with g4, but we'll just start with g4. Now, for example, queen h4 makes a threat, queen c3 check is trying to defend, and after a move like knight d4, well, we can simply take and take. And now Garry's going to be able to break through with a move like h5. And this is just going to be a dead draw, in fact. The play could continue with something like queen takes f4, h takes g4, queen f5, g takes h3 check, king h2, rook g2 check, king h1, and after a move like d4, it's pretty clear that the only player having any fun in this position is really going to be Garry with all of this pressure around the white king. Just for example, a move like rook c8 check is going to be met with rook g8, and after a move like rook c7, rook g7, and you can imagine that this is how a game could have ended. So Garry really should have gone for this active play on the king side. Now, if f4 first, it's more or less the same, I think. If queen takes d5, well, now f3 is going for similar types of counterplay. For example, g4, and a move like queen h6 is already making these types of threats, Okay. Instead, though, Garry chose d4, responding to a threat in the center. So now I'm going to flip it over to the chat once again. Garry played the slightly inaccurate d4. How do you pounce with white? How do you take advantage of this slight misstep from Garry Kasparov? Yeah, dead draw was probably the wrong word. The point of that final position, the reason it's drawn, is neither player can really risk too much, or else their own king is going to get eviscerated. So that's why you end up with these weird types of repetitions with like rook c8, rook c7, rook g8, rook g7, just because neither player can really bring the pieces away from their own king without getting killed. Okay, Jurien seems to have the correct answer. It is, in fact, this move, knight d6. You bring this knight to a phenomenal square on d6, and you are really just attacking all sides of the board here. And now in the game, Garry does finally go for this f4 move, but it's simply too little too late now. After knight takes b7, you're not in time with things like f3. Simply g3 will come on the board, and there's no good solution to this placement of this knight. Instead, Garry tries knight e5 first, which is in fact a better try. But now the accurate follow-up from deep blue is the move queen d5. And the point here is you guard g2 and you attack f7. And these are really the two critical squares here. So f3 comes on the board very naturally from Garry Kasparov. Now g3 is the defense for deep blue. Now knight d3 is what Garry Kasparov tried, but the move rook c7. And all of a sudden, white has built some sort of shelter around his own king, and the shelter around black's king seems to be crumbling. And this is where deep blue ended up killing its opponent. Rook e8 was Garry Kasparov's try, and who on this earth can see the win now for deep blue? Who can see the way to end Garry Kasparov? Who sees the win? Who sees the win? Okay, I'm not going to wait for the entire delay. Of course, the win here is not to play a move like rook takes f7. Then, after the move rook e1 check, king h2, knight takes f2, all of a sudden, you've got some very serious problems around your own king here. Queen takes f3 would have to come on the board, but after takes and takes, it is actually black who is kind of playing for the win here. Example, rook takes f2, rook e2, gotta play king g1, all of a sudden d2, and you are sacrificing a rook and getting into some type of drawn endgame. So very serious problems around the white king. So you cannot play a move like rook takes f7, because you're going to get ignored and checkmate is going to be threatened. So instead of rook takes f7, the best move, of course, is knight to d6. The point being, rook e1 check as played in the game, king h2, knight takes f2, and what's the idea for Garry Kasparov? Well, knight takes f7 is a check. Now, of course, if queen takes f7, we are not recapturing this piece, hanging mate in 1. Instead, we're going for this move, queen d8 with check, and this is the killer blow. You can't play king g7, as this falls with check, as does this. For example, rook takes f7 is check, and then I suppose we can just solve this problem on h1 in this manner. Queen takes f3, and white is up a queen. So you can't play king g7. Sorry, I was second-guessing myself for a second. And you can't play the move queen g8 because queen takes e5 is going to be a checkmate. So knight takes f7 is the killer blow from deep blue. Now king g7 was Garry Kasparov's choice, but this is a bit hopeless. Knight g5 is check, king h6, rook takes h7 is check, and checkmate will follow shortly. Garry Kasparov simply resigned, but if the move king g6, now queen g8 comes on the board, king f5, and knight takes f3. And this king is simply getting murdered, and white is safe after this f3 pawn falls off the board. So that is how Deep Blue managed to take out Garry Kasparov in this game from the 1996 match. It looks simple enough here, but due to Black's opening play, leaving himself with all of these weaknesses to look after, he forced himself, or backed himself, into a little bit of a corner where he had to find some very accurate play on the king's side to get counterplay to negate White's threats to all of these queenside pawns. And Garry simply didn't find it. Okay, I have one more game for you guys to go over here tonight, and it is a game between Veselin Topalov and Viswanathan Anand. And this is a game actually from their World Championship match. Way back, I believe in 2010, from the 2010 World Championship match. And this is a match that's actually pretty dear to me. It's the first World Championship that I followed live. I had a great time watching this one back when I was a little kiddo, and it was a lot of fun to see these two players battle it out. And this is a game that, of course, went Veselin's way, because we're looking at losses by the world champions. But it is a very, very fun game from both players, nonetheless. So let's just take a look. Once again, it's going to be a d4 game. We have knight f6, c4, and g6 from Viswanathan Anand. After knight c3, d5, and Vishy pulled out the Gruenfeld in this world championship. A lot of fun. So c takes d5 was played in the game. Now knight takes d5, e4. This is mainline stuff. We have knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop g7, bishop c4. c5 is natural from Black to challenge these central pawns. Knight e2 from White supports them. Note that White goes to e2 rather than f3, because after f3, you're just a little bit more prone to getting pinned with bishop g4 later on in the game. So knight e2 instead. Now we have knight c6, bishop e3, castles, castles, and knight a5 from Black. This is a pretty common maneuver in the Gruenfeld, and it's a common line against this bishop c4 stuff, just hitting the bishop. The bishop drops back to d3, and now Black plays this move b6 just to support his c5 pawn a little bit more, and perhaps prepare to bring this bishop out to b7, where it can challenge these central pawns. White's next move is queen d2, and this is really a decision point for Viswanathan Anand now. So far, White has pretty much just played the most natural moves, got the pieces out, supported the center, brings the queen up, prepares to bring rooks to the center, and prepares to challenge this bishop here on h6. And in the game, Vishy went for a highly committal move that goes in for a line that might not actually be the most comfortable for Black. You could just play it very simply with a move like bishop b7 and kind of keeping the tension here. White's likely going to continue with bishop h6 after something like c takes d4, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, and c takes d4. You just have this little type of game where White still maintains these central pawns, and Black tries to get on the c-file and find counterplay over here. This is one option for Black. Instead, Vishy played the slightly more testing line with e5. And with e5, Black is shutting down all of the dark squares for White. Now, no matter what happens, Black is going to gain some dark squares in the center. For example, if you play some nothing move like f3, well, already, in fact, you're losing your d4 pawn. It gets quite difficult quite quickly. One option for White is to play a move like d5, but now this d4 square is totally under Black's control. And a move like f5 is going to be slightly awkward for White to deal with pressure on this e4 pawn already. In the game, Veselin Topalov goes for the most active try for White, which is in fact simply to sacrifice this d4 pawn. He plays the move bishop h6, and I really like this type of play from Veselin here. And this is the type of uncompromising play that it really takes to beat a sitting world champion. you can't really win chess games without sacrificing, not sacrificing, without risking something, without taking some amount of risk. In Wesley So's game, that was the risk incurred by allowing Magnus to kind of take this a3 pawn and get the bishop's pair. In the Deep Blue game, this was kind of the risk incurred by Deep Blue by allowing Garry all this active play on the king side. And in this game, the risk incurred by Veselin Topalov is allowing the world champion to take on d4. So each game we see a player beat the world champion, they do in fact have to risk something. So no victory without risk. So c takes d4 is played, bishop takes g7 now, king takes g7, c takes d4, and e takes d4. And black is securely up a pawn. Rook ac1 is Veselin Topalov's choice, taking advantage of this totally open file. Queen d6 from Vichy, and then who thinks they can find the plan for white? What is white's plan in this position? You've just sacrificed a pawn, you need active play. Where are you going to find it? Where can you find the active play? You need something special for white here. Otherwise, your opponent up a clean pawn. Iminox Gamer has the plan that was played in the game. Of course, f4 and f5 is the way to go here with white. You want to try and break down this king side, try and make use of these weak dark squares by attacking this king. So f4, f5, definitely the way to go for white. What you don't want to do is play a move like rook fd1, because this is chess for babies. This is, oh my god, I'm so scared, I gave up a pawn, please don't hurt me, Viswanathan Anand. Please just let me take my pawn back, I promise I won't try to win. Just give me a pawn, I want my pawn back, I'm so scared. So you can't beat world champions like that. Of course, a move like rook d8 could be played, and maybe after knight g3, and maybe after a move like bishop b5, you are in fact going to regain a pawn on d4, but it's not really what you want out of life. It's just not what you want. So f4 is the way to go. f4, challenging black on the king side. Vichy went with f6, and the reasoning behind f6 is you want to meet the move f5, first with queen e5 in this case, and after knight f4, making serious threats to this pawn with the move g5. Vichy adopts this type of dark square defense by placing these pawns onto these squares. Now in the game, Topalov goes for knight h5 check. This king steps back to g8. And now once again, you are faced with the question of how to break down this structure. So your opponent has given you what's called a hook with the g5 pawn. A hook in chess, I've taught a lecture on before. It's something you can latch onto to try and open up files. So in this case, you of course want to latch on to the g5 hook by playing h4. This is how you kind of grab onto the hook. You challenge it with another pawn. Now the move g4 is simply way too much. Queen h6 is already checkmating. Rook f4, rook takes g4. You can't play like this. So h6 is the corner Viswanathan finds himself backed into. Now, Topalov simply captures on g5, and after h takes g5, there is this open h file for white to use. In the game, Topalov goes for rook f3, perhaps preparing to come over to h3, and black plays king f7. Now, who can find the winning move for Topalov? How did Topalov win this game? How to continue, how to win, how to bust open the black king side. TT0 knows this game. It is a pretty famous one. Most world championship games are. Who has the answers? Who knows? So far, nobody. Rahul has the answer. Of course, the way to break through here is with the killer, the absolute killer move, knight takes f6. This is how you get at this black king, and it's how you end up winning the game if your name is Veselin Topalov. King takes f6 was Anand's choice. If you do take this back with the queen, well, now the move rook h3 is going to come on the board. And his king is kind of getting attacked from both sides. And that is really the difficulty faced here by Anand. Let's stick with the game though. King takes f6, still rook h3 comes on the board. It's a very similar problem. Now rook g8 by Viswanathan Anand, but this simply means check, king f7, check. Of course, if you block this, you're going to face capture, when after king takes, there's queen takes g5 with some checkmates, and after queen takes, there's rook c7, picking up the queen. Just to show you king takes, that means queen takes g5 check, king f8, queen d8 check, queen e8, queen f6 check, queen f7, queen... Okay, it's getting a bit silly. Let me stop and think for a moment. Okay, queen d6 check, queen e7, and just a move like queen f4 is going to be enough. And now these pawns are going to come up the board. This rook is going to come into c7, and you are going to get killed. So that's why rook g7 was not played. Instead, king e8. But now, after the move rook c to c7, this game is going to be dead. King d8 played in the game, bishop b5, the final blow from Veselin Topalov. And after queen takes e4, the move rook takes c8 was enough for Vishy to resign the game. Of course now, if king takes, queen c1 is check with checkmates, or, you know, you can throw a knight in the way and I'll take it. And if rook takes, the move rook d7 check is picking up this queen, quite simply. And that is how Veselin Topalov managed to defeat Viswanathan Anand in this game in the World Championship match. Of course, Vishy went on to win this match anyhow, coming back with fire for Veselin Topalov. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this lecture tonight on ways world champions have lost chess games in the past. And hopefully you picked up a few tricks, learned a little something from it as well. If you're watching live, be sure to stay tuned for the endgame class coming up right after this, still here on this YouTube channel. If you're watching the video, thank you very much for joining me. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.